Sunshine. Arrival. The air is as crisp and clean as on the first day. The son of Krypton has arrived. His journey has ended. His adventure begins. Today on the Comic Book Report, Superman Year 1 by Frank Miller and John Romita Jr. Stick around and check it out. Hey, how's it going everyone? My name is Dominic and today you're tuned in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm going to be diving into a book that's been on my to-read list for some time. I found this copy really cheap at a used bookstore recently. But for all of your comic book collected edition needs, I always recommend our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. You can use my code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout today to receive $2 off of your order. Please note, if you use my affiliate code or links, I will earn a small commission from any purchases, but that is a great way to support our channel at no additional cost to you. Thank you for considering. Now let's go ahead and jump into Superman Year 1. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Frank Miller and illustrated by John Romita Jr. The issues in this volume were first published by DC Comics Black Label beginning in 2019. The volume itself collects Superman Year 1, issues 1 through 3. And finally, this hardcover edition comes in at 216 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Superman Year 1 hardcover collection from DC Comics Black Label. And right from the jump, I really enjoy the cover of this. I love the shiny golden Daily Planet orb on the cover. You might notice right away that this is an unusual format for these collected editions, as it's very square as opposed to a more rectangular, more standard kind of comic size. The size is very comparable to the DC Comics Harleen collection. I reviewed that on the channel a while back, as well as something like the Fantastic Four Full Circle from Alex Ross. It is that, again, that kind of boxy format size. I will do a couple comparison shots with some other more standard sizes so you can get an idea of how big this volume is. But before we do that, I do want to give you a look at the dust jacket in full, including the interior flaps, before showing you some of the under the dust jacket artwork we have printed on the hardback book itself. Really love the art they chose for the under the dust jacket art this time. It is absolutely superb, and I think it's just a beautiful looking hardcover book. Again, I do like the dust jacket overall. I think it's clean, really simple on the back, but beautiful. My only complaint on the dust jacket is I really don't like the spine. To me, it looks a bit dated, like a 90s collected edition or early 2000s maybe even. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it. I just think that they could have added a bit more flash, and I might have preferred that a little more. But the rest of the dust jacket, and certainly the under the dust jacket artwork, certainly makes up for it. Love the images we get of Superman here. They're just stunning, larger than life, and really just scream Superman to me, which is, I guess, the whole point here. But overall, very sold. I love how they put this layout together for this book. The exteriors are absolutely beautiful. Next, really quick, just want to show off the binding. I do believe it is a sewn binding. I had absolutely zero issues with this binding as I was reading through it. I think it presented the book absolutely fantastically. Really, really well done. And just generally wanted to give everyone a look before we do some of those comparison shots I mentioned earlier. Okay, the first comparison shot I have is with a standard size hardcover. This one is the Man of Steel Volume 1 by John Byrne. As you can see, this is an oversized format in every respect. I'm referring, of course, to Year 1. You can see that it extends beyond the top and the width of that Man of Steel collection. So this gives you an idea kind of what we're looking at compared to your standard sizes, hardcovers, trade paperback, or single issues. Next up for comparison, I have the Flash by Mark Waid Omnibus Volume 1, which I am currently reading and enjoying quite a bit, so if you're looking for a review on this, stick around the channel. You should hopefully see it in the upcoming weeks. But as you can see, it is the height of an oversized omnibus format, this Superman Year 1, but the Year 1 does extend broader beyond it. So you can see it lines up height-wise, but it will extend longer. Last comparison shot I have here is with the aforementioned Harleen collection from DC Comics Black Label. You can see, as far as I can tell, these are identical dimensions, so this will pair very nicely on a bookcase with a book like this, which I like to see. I like to see more books doing atypical formats, especially when I have a few of them that I can put in the same area on my bookcase. And if you haven't read Harleen yet and you're a fan of DC Comics, I highly recommend you pick it up. I'll try to link the video to this one so you can take a look. And with all that taken care of, it's finally time to dive into Superman Year 1. And what can I say other than I did enjoy this storyline. This is one that snuck up on me. I heard a bit of buzz about it, but I feel like it came and went. I didn't see a ton of people talking about it, although I have heard it recommended to me on this channel a few times, so I knew that this would be something I would eventually want to check out. I am a really big fan of Batman Year 1 by Frank Miller. I also really loved The Man Without Fear, the Daredevil origin that Frank Miller did as well. So I knew when Frank Miller was attached to a Superman Year 1, being a Superman fan myself, I knew that this was something I would eventually try to make my way to. John Romita Jr. is here on art, and I have several books by John Romita Jr. I do enjoy him, but he's not maybe one of my favorite artists. However, I will say that this is some of my favorite artwork I've seen from John Romita Jr. in some time. The art is absolutely electrifying. There's so much character in the faces, and it's just beautiful. The coloring as well should absolutely be commended for this entire collection. This was really a powerhouse creative team, and I think that the effort was more or less rewarded. This was a very solid read, and I'm happy I was able to pick it up. A couple things I do want to note. I think it's almost impossible not to draw comparisons with this compared to Batman Year 1, but I think that you would definitely do a disservice to your reading experience of Superman Year 1 if you do try to compare. I know I have yet to review Batman Year 1 on the channel, but I know a lot of people love this book, myself included. I think it's an undisputed classic Batman work and comic book collection, period. I don't necessarily believe that Superman Year 1 goes on the same tier or level as that collection. So if you can, I highly recommend trying to avoid comparing and just enjoying this work as it stands by itself, and I think that you would find the experience a bit more rewarding. Because what we have here is still a very fun Superman origin retelling. And yes, there has been so many of those. I know I actually reviewed Superman Birthright not too long ago on this channel as well. I have a ton of Superman origin retellings. I've enjoyed almost all of them, this one included. I think some novel approaches that Superman Year 1 takes that I haven't seen in some of those retellings is that it's very much a three-part story that really has kind of isolated stories within each issue. I think that there's maybe more cohesion between issue 1 and 2 than either issue with issue 3, but overall you could read almost each separate issue in this collection as its own standalone vignette. Yes, the story kind of builds and progresses, but it's almost like reading self-contained stories that are all strung together. And I think that that's really a pro and con for this collection. I think if we had more cohesion between the issues and we had kind of a more inclusive narrative, we might have had a more fuller overall story experience. But the fact that these issues almost feel disconnected, maybe not completely, but because there's a lot of gaps, you feel like you're checking in on the story of Superman periodically, rather than reading one point A to point B story. And so that was kind of an interesting experience that I didn't expect. Each issue is also titled with a different place significant to the Superman mythos, at least kind of. The first one is Smallville, the second part is Atlantis, which was kind of surprising to me, and the third part is, of course, Metropolis. So Smallville and Metropolis were certainly expected for me. I think Atlantis kind of threw me for a curve there, but I did like it. I was fascinated to see how they would bring that into the Superman mythos, and overall I was pretty rewarded. I think the other way that this collection was really interesting structure-wise is in addition to having an individual issue that had an individual story, predominantly set and named after kind of a location within the Superman and DC universe, we also have each story kind of focusing on a love interest. Again, issue 3 got a little bit softer with that, but that was also a really interesting aspect that I found within Superman Year 1. In the Smallville portion, the first issue of Superman Year 1, we have him kind of falling in love with Lana Lang, Superman or Clark Kent's first big love interest. We have in issue 2 him falling in love with Lori Lemaris, who is a mermaid. And then in part 3, we have Lois Lane introduced, but by the end of the issue, it makes me wonder if the love interest is more Wonder Woman. So again, issue 3 of all 3 issues feels the most like an outlier. I feel like issue 1 and 2 kind of tried to set up a template of what to expect, and then I think issue 3 kind of subverted it in some interesting ways. But overall, again, a really fun setup for a book. I think it's very, very full for a 3-issue story. I believe these issues are overlong, and with that wider format size, you just get so much bang for your buck for a 3-issue story. As far as the actual storyline or synopsis for Superman Year 1, we start, of course, with the destruction of Krypton. We have the last son of Krypton, Kal-El, being put in his rocket, sent to Earth, found by Jonathan and Martha Kent. We've seen it all before, but it was still fun to revisit. I love John Romita's artwork. I think it really shined as well, seeing the Kent farm and the kind of salt of the earth people. For some reason, I really felt like John Romita's character models really flourished at the Kent kind of Smallville issue. It just felt very small town and great, and I just think it really worked. I don't know how to describe it, but I think that Romita's work really popped off the page here. And overall, we have Clark Kent growing up from when he first lands on, in Smallville up until when he leaves home, presumably around 18 years old. So we have all these little flash forward sequences of him kind of growing up, then going to school. He's sort of bullied, and he kind of tries to make right these people that are wronged by these bullies, but he's always trying to kind of restrain himself and do the best he can without just unleashing his full power on any given person or situation. And we have a lot of great little high school moments kind of captured in this Smallville section. We have a really sweet little blooming romance between Clark Kent and Lana Lang, as I mentioned earlier, and the issue essentially culminates with Superman deciding to join the Navy, to leave home, leave Smallville, leave Lana Lang, and move forward with his life, his next big adventure, to see if he can be challenged, to see if he could test his mettle and his burgeoning strength in bigger and broader challenges in the world at large. So I think that thematically that was kind of a cool way to end the issue, the kind of coming of age story to being kind of more unleashed into the world. The next issue that has to do with Atlantis has Clark picking up shortly thereafter, kind of in boot camp in the Navy. He gets assigned on these kind of missions. He kind of gets pulled into this kind of Black Ops sounding mission. While this is all happening, he's also being kind of called, almost like a siren song, to these mermaids. He uncovers Atlantis deep in the ocean, and he kind of falls under the thrall of this mermaid character, Lori Lemaris. We've seen her in different incarnations in Superman mythos. I enjoyed how we saw her in the John Byrne era run. This was another kind of paramour for Clark Kent Superman, and I thought it was really fun that they made that character so much more substantial for this Superman Year 1 story. I think the second issue, Atlantis, was the most surprising in many ways. I did not expect them to spend time on this, and so the fact that it's a bulk portion of this book, with it being a third at least, I thought that was a ton of fun. I like seeing more given to Lori Lemaris, a very fascinating character. At any rate, this second issue deals with his time in the Navy. He is eventually honorably discharged after a mission mishap when he kind of saves everyone in a way that I guess they didn't want him to or something. And anyway, he ends up going into the sea, going to Atlantis, and trying to court Lori Lemaris. He has to fight the Kraken. We see him in his Superman costume. We have a very creepy version of kind of the King of Atlantis that was really disturbing. Played kind of a villain or antagonistic role in this issue. At any rate, it culminates with the kind of love story between Clark Kent and Lori Lemaris. And then we flash ahead to issue 3, Metropolis. And right away we have Clark leaving Atlantis. He saves Lois Lane, takes down, I think Navy guys, maybe Navy SEALs or something. And he eventually goes to Metropolis. He saves a bunch of people. He kind of gets on the radar of Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor tries to basically co-op Superman and tries to use him in all of his schemes. And he basically tries to pit Batman and Superman against each other. Joker is kind of involved, I guess, sort of, and we're basically thrown into a Batman-Superman story. We have Lois Lane appearing throughout the issue, but they don't really stress her as a romantic lead, which I thought was an interesting step from Superman Year One. Anyway, the story ultimately culminates with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman basically banding together to stop Lex Luthor. The day is essentially saved, but we find out that Lex Luthor knows of a surviving remnant of Krypton, the bottled city of Kandor, that's being captured by Brainiac. So the story basically ends, Superman basically kisses Wonder Woman and then flies off into space to presumably battle Brainiac. And that's basically the synopsis of this story. There are a couple more nuanced ins and outs throughout it, but that's basically Superman Year One in a nutshell. I think as far as the narrative goes, we have a ton of Frank Miller internal monologues that kind of have this sort of epic scope, this kind of detached, really succinct, little punchy thought dialogue narration boxes. So again, if you've read a lot of Frank Miller, it might be familiar. I think that for me, it was maybe overdone a tad in this book. I think that that kind of flourish I like better in the world of Batman. To have it so much for Superman, I found it a bit alienating at sometimes. I think that it made Superman feel, well, more alien than human in many ways, and maybe that was the point of this, but I personally like my Superman when he feels the most human, and I think instead I felt this Superman to be a little bit more detached, a little bit more superhuman and beyond. And I think that that was just kind of an interesting touch narratively. I think what Frank Miller did do here, though, was really well done. It's just not maybe my favorite flavor of Superman. Another interesting facet of this book I found was how we predominantly focused on some of these romantic love interest kind of things, but we never really picked it up. We made it sound like, oh, he'd never forget Lana Lang, he'd always be faithful, and then she's never mentioned again. Then we have him doing these heroic battles to win Lori Lamaris and rule this Atlantean kingdom, and then in issue 3 he leaves and never returns. And I just thought that was really odd that we build up these kind of big romantic epic stories and then we don't have any closure, we don't see it again, and we just see him falling in love with someone else. And then issue 3 almost tries to do that, and then it feels like it abandons that concept completely, and we get sort of this DC Trinity, you know, the Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman story, but it feels kind of shoehorned in. It felt a bit rushed. And it made me kind of reevaluate this collection as a whole. I started to think, is this just trying to do a couple greatest hits, highlights for Superman's life, rather than having one more really coherent storyline, you know, point A to point B kind of storytelling? So overall, I just really felt like it turned some corners in that last issue that really surprised me. I love seeing more Frank Miller's Batman, and the Batman-Superman dynamic was a ton of fun. I do think Wonder Woman was also utilized really well. But it's almost like I think this collection could have used in issue 4, one issue that maybe served as a kind of primer with Metropolis, and then maybe a last issue that had to do with the more super heroic, kind of proto-Justice League, super villainy kind of feel. I think that we could have used maybe one more issue in here to kind of help flesh out this collection a bit more, because I think that that third issue just really tried to tackle a ton. And it was executed okay in my opinion, but I think that that's where it lost me a little bit. Overall, still love this collection though. I really love the art, and it was really fun to do another retelling of Superman's origin. I like seeing Frank Miller's spin on it, and overall, this was still a success story, at least for me. I'm so happy I got a chance to read this. The collection ended with a few extras, some sketches, some art, a little bit of blurbs, things like that as you saw, and that really is Superman Year One, this hardcover edition, and now all that's left is to give this collection a grade. For some of the best art I've seen come from John Romita Jr. in some time, coupled with that incredible Frank Miller style, the Comic Book Report has to give Superman Year One a B. I think that this was a really suitable Superman retelling. I really like the structure of this book and how they approached it. I do think that the execution was maybe not quite A material for me. I could definitely see myself revisiting this in the future and enjoying it. As a Superman fan, I really loved it. And yet, I don't think that this is a Superman classic book in the same way Batman Year One is a classic Batman work. I still really loved it. I would definitely recommend it to readers who want to check it out, but maybe not a must-read to all casual comic fans. At any rate, that's what I thought of Superman Year 1. I would love to hear your feedback in the comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I'm wrong about this. And just generally, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like and maybe check out some of my other videos. And until next time, have a good one.